The strange thing about being underestimated is that sometimes the person standing closest to you is the last one to realize who you are. That thought crossed my mind while my wife stood beneath a chandelier at the Whitmore Technologies annual leadership gala and introduced another man as the reason her life had turned out so well. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 47 years old, and until that night, most of the people in that ballroom knew me only as Clare Mercer's husband. I had learned to live with that description. Clare was good at what she did. Better than good. At 42, she was a senior vice president at Whitmore Technologies, the kind of executive whose calendar was booked 3 weeks out and whose name appeared on conference panels beside people who wore expensive watches and never seemed to look at them. I was proud of her. I had always been proud of her. But somewhere along the way, pride had become something different between us. That evening, the ballroom of the Ashford Hotel in downtown Chicago glowed beneath warm gold lights. Waiters moved between white linen tables carrying trays of sparkling water and champagne. A jazz trio played quietly near the windows. Beyond the glass, the city stretched out in lights 30 floors below us. Clare looked completely at home. Navy blue dress. Hair pinned neatly behind one ear. Company badge clipped discreetly at her waist because even at a formal gala she liked people to know exactly where she belonged. I stood beside her in a charcoal suit I had owned for 6 years. Clare had suggested I buy a new one. I told her this one still fit. She smiled the way people smile when they decide not to argue. We were speaking with 3 executives from finance when Robert Whitmore entered the circle. Robert was 56, silver-haired, composed, and carried the easy confidence of a man whose name was printed on the building where everyone else worked. Clare's entire expression changed when she saw him. Her shoulders straightened. Her smile brightened. "Robert," she said warmly, "I was hoping Daniel would finally get to meet you." Robert turned toward me, but before I could speak, Clare continued, "Daniel, this is Robert Whitmore, the man who saved my career." She laughed softly, but there was real admiration behind it. "I'm serious. 6 years ago, when nobody in leadership knew my name, Robert took a chance on me. Everything that came after started because of him." Robert gave her a modest smile. "Clare earned every step." "That's what he always says," she replied. Then she touched my sleeve almost absently. "And this is my husband, Daniel. He's mostly retired these days. He does a little consulting here and there." A little consulting. 3 words. Light enough to disappear beneath the music. I looked at her. She didn't notice. Maybe she really believed it. Maybe after years of me refusing to talk about work at dinner, refusing interviews, refusing invitations, she had filled the empty space with the simplest explanation available. Daniel stepped away from business. Daniel slowed down. Daniel didn't really do much anymore. Nolan Pierce, Whitmore's chief financial officer, lifted his glass. "Mostly retired at 47, he said. "Daniel, you've cracked the code. Clare climbs the ladder. You enjoy the view." The others laughed politely. Clare did too. Not cruelly. That almost made it worse. I could have corrected them. I didn't. There are moments when defending yourself only makes you look like you're asking permission to matter. I had stopped doing that a long time ago. "Something like that," I said. Nolan grinned, satisfied, and turned back toward Robert. That should have been the end of it. Another harmless corporate joke. Another evening where I became the quiet husband standing just outside Clare's professional spotlight. Then I noticed Robert wasn't listening to Nolan anymore. He was staring at me. Not casually. Carefully. His eyes narrowed slightly, like he was searching through an old memory and had just found the right file. He glanced at my face, then at Clare, then back at me. The champagne glass in his hand stopped halfway to his mouth. "I'm sorry," he said. "Daniel, what's your last name?" Clare answered before I could. "Mercer." The noise around us seemed to soften. Robert lowered his glass. "Daniel Mercer?" This time he said my name differently. Nolan's smile faded by half an inch. Clare looked between us. "Yes," I said. Robert took one step closer. For the first time that night, the polished CEO expression disappeared from his face. What replaced it wasn't surprise exactly. It was recognition, the kind that carries history with it. He extended his hand, and when I took it, he held on a second longer than people usually do at business parties. "Daniel," he said quietly, "I don't believe this." Clare gave a confused laugh. "Wait, you two know each other." Robert looked at her, then back at me. "Know him," he said. Then he shook his head slowly. "Clare, you just introduced me as the man who saved your career." Nobody around us spoke. Robert's grip tightened slightly around my hand. I should probably tell you something. He looked directly at my wife. Your husband is the man who saved my company. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Claire looked at Robert as if she had heard the words, but could not make them fit inside the version of the world she knew. Nolan lowered his glass. The three finance executives beside him suddenly found the ballroom floor very interesting. I released Robert's hand and slipped mine into my pocket. That was a long time ago, I said. Robert gave me the kind of look men give when they know modesty has gone too far. 6 years is not that long when 4,000 people still have jobs because of what happened in one conference room. Claire turned toward me. Daniel, what is he talking about? Her voice was quieter now. The confidence she had carried all evening had developed a crack. I could feel people listening without pretending not to. Robert noticed it too. He stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice, but not enough to make the conversation private. Whitmore Technologies was in serious trouble 6 years ago, he said. Not the kind we put in annual reports. The kind that keeps a chief executive awake at 3 in the morning wondering whether payroll will clear on Friday. Claire stared at him. She knew the company had gone through restructuring before she joined senior leadership. Everyone knew that. What she did not know was how close the doors had come to closing. Robert continued. Our lenders were losing patience. 2 major contracts had collapsed within the same quarter. The board was divided. We had less than 72 hours to put together a credible rescue plan before the banks forced decisions none of us wanted to make. Nolan shifted his weight. His face had changed. Not much, but enough for me to notice. Finance people understand certain words differently than everyone else. Covenant, liquidity, default, rescue capital. Those words have weight. Robert pointed toward me with an open hand. Then Mercer Strategic walked in. Claire looked at me again. Mercer Strategic? I nodded once. That was my firm. She blinked. Your firm? There was no anger in her voice yet. Mostly disbelief. I understood why. At home, my work existed inside a laptop, a few phone calls, and occasional trips I described as consulting meetings. I had never lied to her. I had simply stopped explaining things she had stopped asking about. Robert smiled faintly. Daniel did not come in with a motivational speech. He came in with a legal pad, for people, and a list of questions that made half my executive team uncomfortable. I remembered that room immediately. Cold coffee, fluorescent lights, financial statements spread across a table large enough to seat 16 people. Robert looking 10 years older than he did now. I had seen companies in trouble before. Whitmore was different. The business underneath the debt was still good. Good employees, good products, bad timing, expensive mistakes, and too many senior people protecting their own decisions. Robert said. Within one day, Daniel had identified 3 divisions worth protecting, 2 assets we could sell without damaging the core business, and a refinancing structure our own advisors had missed. Nolan cleared his throat. Robert, perhaps this is not the place for old restructuring stories. Robert looked at him. I think it is exactly the place. Nolan said nothing. Claire folded her arms, not defensively, but like she needed something solid to hold on to. Why have I never heard any of this? She asked me. That question landed harder than Nolan's joke had. Not because I did not have an answer, because I had too many. I looked at her and kept my voice even. You knew I ran Mercer Strategic. Years ago. Yes. I thought you sold it. I stepped away from daily operations. Her eyes narrowed. That is not the same thing. No, I said. It is not. Robert glanced between us and realized he had opened a door neither of us could close in the middle of a ballroom. He tried to soften the moment. Claire, Daniel never wanted public credit. That was part of the reason I trusted him. Then he looked at me. You disappeared before the press conference. The company needed confidence in you, not attention on me. Robert laughed once under his breath. That sounds exactly like you. I could feel Claire studying my face as if she were trying to compare the man beside her with someone she had somehow missed. Then Robert said something that changed the temperature again. You know, I still have the original rescue agreement in my office. Nolan's head lifted immediately. That reaction was faster than Claire's. Faster than mine. Robert noticed. So did I. You kept it? I asked. Every page. Nolan stepped in. Those agreements were superseded years ago. Robert turned toward him slowly. Some were. The silence that followed felt different. This was no longer about my wife's introduction. Something else had entered the room. Something Nolan clearly understood before Claire did. Robert looked back at me. Daniel, I assume Redwood still receives the quarterly reports. Claire's expression went blank. I said nothing for a moment. Then she whispered the name like she had seen it before. Redwood. I met her eyes. Yes. Her face changed. Because Claire knew exactly how often that name appeared inside Whitmore Technologies. She just had no idea whose name was standing behind it. Claire knew Redwood Strategic Holdings the way most executives knew a powerful shareholder they had never met. Through reports, legal notices, and the occasional sentence that made an entire conference room more careful. She had seen the name on board materials. She had heard Robert mention Redwood during quarterly planning. She had even complained about it once over dinner, saying some silent investor seemed to have an opinion about everything without ever showing up in person. I had been standing at the kitchen counter slicing tomatoes when she said it. I remembered looking down at the cutting board and asking, "Does that bother you?" She had shrugged. "I just do not understand people who want influence but never want to be seen." At the time, I almost laughed. I did not. That had become a pattern in our marriage. Claire would describe a world I knew intimately, and I would listen like a visitor. Not because I was playing a game. Not because I wanted to embarrass her someday. Life is rarely that dramatic while you are actually living it. The truth was quieter. Years earlier, when I stepped away from daily operations at Mercer Strategic, I made a decision to stop bringing work home. For almost 20 years, business had followed me everywhere. Phone calls during dinner. Flights before sunrise. Hotels where every hallway looked the same. I had helped companies survive crises, but I had also learned what constant urgency could take from a person. So when Claire's career started accelerating, I chose something different. I worked fewer visible hours. I advised only a handful of companies. I kept my investments private. I answered calls from my home office instead of downtown conference rooms. Most mornings, I made coffee before Claire came downstairs. Some afternoons, I drove my old Ford pickup to the hardware store because I preferred fixing a loose cabinet hinge myself. I mowed our lawn on Saturdays when the weather was good. I cooked 3 or 4 nights a week because Claire often got home after 7. From the outside, I suppose it looked like retirement. From Claire's perspective, it slowly became retirement. At first she would ask, "How was your call?" Then it became, "Were you working today?" Eventually, she stopped asking at all. I noticed. I told myself it did not matter. A man should not need a weekly explanation of his value from his own wife. But little things began changing. At dinner parties, Claire would tell people I had done well in consulting. Past tense. At company functions, she described me as semi-retired. Once, at a fundraiser, a man asked what I did for a living, and before I could answer, Claire smiled and said, "Daniel has the luxury of taking it easy now." Everyone nodded like that explained me. I smiled too. The words were not cruel. That was what made them difficult to challenge. Cruelty is easy to recognize. Assumptions arrive wearing softer clothes. Over time, I became a simpler version of myself inside Claire's stories. The husband who used to be ambitious. The husband who had made enough money to slow down. The husband who no longer understood the pressure of serious leadership. Meanwhile, her world became faster. Bigger title. Larger team. More travel. More dinners where people measured each other by access, responsibility, and the number of people waiting for their approval. I watched the language come home with her. She started saying people were important when she meant powerful. She called people successful when she meant visible. She respected Robert deeply because he had opened doors for her, and I never resented that. Robert deserved respect. What bothered me was something I did not have a name for yet. Claire had begun looking at our lives through a corporate org chart, and somewhere on that chart, I had quietly moved downward. The irony was almost perfect. While she believed I had stepped away from the world she admired, I was still reading reports from it every quarter. Redwood received financial statements, acquisition summaries, debt updates, and governance notices from Whitmore Technologies. Most of them arrived electronically. I reviewed them early in the morning, usually before Claire came downstairs. There were days when she walked through the kitchen talking about a company problem I had already read about in a board packet 2 hours earlier. I never interrupted. It was her career. I wanted her achievements to belong to her. That mattered to me. I had never called Robert to ask for a promotion on her behalf. I had never used a vote to make her path easier. If Claire climbed, she needed to know she had climbed on her own ability. Standing in that ballroom now, watching her connect my face to the name Redwood for the first time, I realized my silence had protected something important, but it had also allowed something else to grow. She stared at me as if our kitchen, our quiet mornings, my pickup in the driveway, and every casual answer I had given about work were rearranging themselves in her memory. "You are Redwood?" she asked. I shook my head once. "Not exactly." Nolan exhaled quietly beside us. Robert looked at me with the expression of a man who knew the next sentence would change the room again. Claire heard it too. "Then what exactly are you?" she asked. I looked at my wife and realized there was no simple answer left. "Redwood is a holding company," I said, "and I am the person behind it." Claire did not answer right away. Her eyes moved from me to Robert, then to Nolan, then back to me, as if one of us might suddenly explain that the last 60 seconds had been some elaborate misunderstanding. Nobody did. The jazz trio continued playing near the windows. Glasses touched softly at nearby tables. Somewhere behind us, someone laughed at a conversation that had nothing to do with ours. Ordinary sounds. That was the strange part. Your understanding of a marriage can shift while the rest of the room keeps moving like nothing happened. Claire lowered her voice. "How long?" she asked. "How long have you been behind Redwood?" "Since it was formed." Her jaw tightened. "And when was that?" 6 years ago." She looked away. 6 years. I knew exactly what she was calculating because I had lived those years beside her. 6 years ago, Claire had still been wearing inexpensive heels she complained about during her commute. She had still packed lunches in a canvas bag because buying food downtown every day felt wasteful. She had still called me from the parking garage after difficult meetings and asked whether I thought she belonged in rooms full of executives. I always gave her the same answer. If they invited you into the room, make them remember why. Back then, success was something we talked about together. She would come home, kick off her shoes by the front door, and sit across from me at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee between us. She told me everything. The difficult manager. The presentation that went better than expected. The director who finally remembered her name. I listened because I cared, not because I wanted to manage her career. When she earned her first major promotion, I took her to a small Italian place near Lincoln Park where the tables were too close together and the waiter brought us a slice of chocolate cake with congratulations written across the plate. Claire laughed when she saw it. She reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and said, "We did it." I corrected her. "You did it." She shook her head. "No, we did." I remembered that sentence now because somewhere along the line, the word we had become 2 separate versions of success. Claire's promotions came faster after that. Director, vice president, senior vice president. Her salary climbed. Her responsibilities grew. Her calendar became a wall of colored blocks. None of that bothered me. I admired competence, and Claire had plenty of it. What changed was the way she began describing people. At first, she talked about what they did. Then she started talking about where they sat, who reported to whom, who had access to Robert, who flew first class, who got invited to private dinners after conferences. Status entered our home so quietly I almost missed it. One evening, we were having dinner with a couple Claire worked with. The husband mentioned leaving a corporate job to teach at a community college. Claire smiled politely, but later in the car she said, "I cannot imagine giving up that kind of position." I asked, "What if he is happier?" She looked out the passenger window. "Happiness does not pay for retirement." I let the comment go. Another time, she came home frustrated because a younger executive had been promoted ahead of one of her friends. She did not talk about whether he deserved it. She talked about what car he drove, who his father knew, and how quickly he had gotten access to the top floor. I remember standing at the stove stirring soup and wondering when achievement had started sounding so much like ranking. Then the language began touching me. You would understand if you were still in that world. You do not have the same pressure anymore. Things are different at my level. Each sentence was small, reasonable even, but small things repeated long enough can build a wall. I never told her that some mornings, before she left for the office, I had already reviewed 60 pages of financial reporting from companies worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I never told her that chief executives still called me when decisions became too expensive to get wrong. I did not think marriage should require presenting credentials at breakfast. So I stayed quiet. Claire filled the silence herself. My restraint became retirement. My privacy became irrelevance. My ordinary clothes became proof that I had stepped away from ambition. And because I never corrected her, she stopped looking closer. Standing in the ballroom now, I could see those years returning to her one memory at a time. You let me talk about Redwood in front of you, she said. Yes. You let me complain about them. Yes. And you never said anything. You were talking about a shareholder, I said. You were not asking about me. Her face tightened. That is convenient. It is true. Robert shifted slightly, uncomfortable now. This was no longer a business conversation. It was marriage history wearing formal clothes. Claire looked at me for several seconds. So while I was building my career, you were sitting at home quietly controlling part of the company? No, I said. While you were building your career, I was trying very hard not to control it. That stopped her. I continued before she could answer. I never called Robert about you. I never asked for a promotion. I never used Redwood to put you in a room you had not earned your way into. Robert nodded once. That is true. Claire looked at him. He added, Daniel never asked me for a single professional favor involving you. Something moved across her face then. Not relief. Something heavier. Because the truth had just removed the easiest explanation. She could not say I had secretly built her career. She had earned it. Every promotion. Every difficult meeting. Every late night. But she had also spent years believing the man waiting at home had become smaller while she became larger. Nolan cleared his throat and glanced toward Robert. We should probably return to the program. I looked at him. His eyes shifted away too quickly. It was the second time that evening Nolan had tried to end a conversation the moment Redwood became specific. I had spent enough years around executives to recognize discomfort. This was different. This was calculation. Robert seemed to notice it too. Claire was still staring at me when Nolan said, whatever Redwood's historic involvement was, most of those protections are largely ceremonial now. I turned toward him. Ceremonial? Nolan gave a careful smile. For practical purposes. Robert's expression changed. Mine probably did too. Because there are certain phrases finance executives should never use casually. I took my hand from my pocket. Nolan, I said, what exactly have you been told about Redwood's rights? I was told Redwood retained certain approval provisions from the restructuring. Nolan said, choosing each word with the care of a man walking through a room where he did not know which floorboards were loose. But the company is in a completely different position now. I watched him for a moment. That was not my question. Robert lowered his glass. Claire remained beside me, silent now, her attention moving between us. Nolan adjusted his cuff. My understanding is that the provisions are legacy protections. Your understanding, I said. Not the agreement. His smile thinned. Daniel, nobody is suggesting the agreement does not exist. Good. I let the silence settle. 6 years earlier, the existence of that agreement had been the only reason Whitmore Technologies survived 72 of the longest hours I had ever spent inside a conference room. I still remembered the first morning Robert called me. It was just after 5:30. Chicago was dark, and rain tapped against the windows of my office. Robert did not introduce himself with the confidence he carried now. His voice sounded tired. He said his company had a liquidity problem. People in business like clean phrases when the truth is ugly. Liquidity problem. Temporary pressure. Strategic challenge. By 8 that morning, I knew. The problem had a simpler name. They were running out of time. Whitmore had expanded too quickly, financed 2 acquisitions with debt, and lost a government contract everyone had treated as guaranteed revenue. The numbers looked survivable until you placed the deadlines beside them. A credit covenant would be breached within days. A major lender was prepared to freeze further borrowing. Payroll for more than 4,000 employees was approaching. Robert had advisors, lawyers, bankers, consultants. What he did not have was agreement. Every person in the room seemed determined to protect the decision they had made 6 months earlier. I remember closing a binder and asking one question. Are we trying to save everyone's reputation, or are we trying to save the company? Nobody answered. That was when the real meeting began. For the next 18 hours, my team stripped the business down to what mattered. We separated profitable operations from expensive distractions. We identified equipment that could be sold without damaging production. We called lenders who had stopped taking Robert's calls. We built 3 cash flow models and threw away 2 of them before midnight. Robert stayed in the room almost the entire time. No speeches. No excuses. That mattered to me. A company can recover from bad numbers. It rarely recovers from leadership that refuses to admit them. By the second morning, we had a plan. It was not comfortable. Good rescue plans usually are not. Whitmore would sell 2 non-essential assets, suspend an expansion project, refinance part of its debt, and accept outside capital under conditions designed to prevent the same mistakes from happening again. The banks wanted proof that someone with real money was willing to stand behind the plan. That was where Redwood came in. At the time, Redwood was nothing more than a structure on paper connected to capital I controlled with two long-term investment partners. We had no public brand, no website worth mentioning. We did not need one. We were not selling anything to the public. We were buying time for companies that still deserved to exist. Robert needed $40 million in committed capital before the lenders would extend the deadline. We offered it, but not as charity. I had seen too many rescue deals fail because the people writing the check had no authority after the crisis passed. So the agreement included voting rights, access to quarterly financial reporting, board representation, and approval requirements for certain transactions large enough to put the company at risk again. Robert read every page. Then he signed. On the third morning, the lenders signed too. Payroll cleared. The doors stayed open. Thousands of employees went to work without ever knowing how close they had come to receiving a very different message from human resources. I left before Robert spoke to the press because the story needed to be about stability, not about me. Back in the ballroom, Nolan was still watching me. Those protections were designed for an emergency, he said. Some of them, I replied. Others were designed to prevent another one. Robert's eyes settled on Nolan. And those are still active. Nolan did not respond. Claire finally spoke. How much of Whitmore does Redwood actually control? I turned toward her. Control is the wrong word. Then give me the right one. I could hear frustration beneath her calm now. Fair frustration. She had discovered more about my business life in 10 minutes than she had known in years. Redwood holds 26% of the voting interest, I said. Claire's lips parted slightly. Nolan looked toward the nearest table, then back at Robert. 26% did not make me king of anything. It did, however, make Redwood impossible to ignore, especially when the old agreement attached special approval rights to certain debt levels, asset sales, and major acquisitions. Robert looked at Nolan again. You said those protections were ceremonial. Nolan lifted both hands slightly. I said largely ceremonial. There is a difference, I said, between something people rarely use and something people no longer have. His jaw tightened. That was when I noticed Robert's expression shift from irritation to concern. Nolan, he said, is there a transaction you believe does not require Redwood approval? The question hung between us. Claire looked at him. I looked at him. Nolan took a slow breath before answering. There is nothing we need to discuss tonight. And with that single sentence, I knew there was absolutely something we needed to discuss. Robert did not ask Nolan the question again. He did not need to. The way Nolan avoided his eyes told me more than any answer would have. In business, hesitation has a sound. It is the half second before someone chooses a safer sentence. It is the breath a person takes when they realize the room is no longer arranged in their favor. Nolan glanced toward the stage where an event coordinator was adjusting a microphone for the next presentation. This is a leadership gala, he said. We can review anything relevant during normal business hours. Robert's face remained calm. If it is relevant enough for you to avoid answering, then I would like to know what it is. Claire stood beside me without speaking. 10 minutes earlier, she had been the most comfortable person in the circle. Now she seemed to be hearing her own company in a language she had never been taught. I understood that feeling. There is a difference between working inside a building and knowing what holds it up. I looked at Nolan. Is this about Denver? His expression changed before he could stop it. That was enough. Robert turned toward me. What about Denver? I kept my eyes on Nolan. You tell me. Nolan forced a small laugh. There is no Denver issue. I did not say there was an issue. Silence. Robert's shoulders lowered slightly, which I had learned years ago was what he did when he became serious. Nolan, the chief financial officer, finally set his glass on a passing server's tray. We have been evaluating an acquisition opportunity in Colorado. Preliminary only. Nothing approved. Claire looked at him. North Star Systems? Nolan gave her a sharp glance. How do you know that name? Because strategy mentioned them during the regional expansion review last month. Robert turned fully toward Nolan. I was told North Star was only a market study. It was. Nolan looked around our small circle as if the walls had moved closer. The opportunity developed. I asked. Developed into what? He hesitated again. A potential acquisition. Purchase price. Not final. Range. Daniel, this is confidential company information. Robert almost smiled at that, but there was no humor in it. He represents our largest strategic voting bloc. I think confidentiality is covered. Nolan's mouth tightened. Roughly $180 million. Claire inhaled quietly. Robert stared at him. 180 million? Approximately. And when were you planning to tell me? Once the financing structure was complete. That sentence changed everything. A chief financial officer does not complete financing before informing a chief executive about a transaction of that size. Not in a healthy company. Not under the agreement I had helped write. I could feel the old instincts returning. The gala disappeared around the edges. The music became distant. Numbers began arranging themselves in my head. Whitmore's last quarterly report showed strong revenue, but tighter free cash flow than I liked. A $180 million acquisition would require substantial debt unless the seller accepted equity. Either option touched protections Redwood still held. How much new debt? I asked. Nolan did not answer. How much? Robert repeated. We are evaluating multiple structures. That means there is a number. Nolan looked at me. The current model assumes approximately $120 million in new borrowing. Claire turned toward Robert. Would that not push us above the leverage threshold from the restructuring covenant? She knew enough to understand the problem. Nolan answered too quickly. The threshold can be interpreted differently after subsequent amendments. I looked at him. No, it cannot. He frowned. You have not seen the current documents. Redwood receives every amendment affecting its rights. Robert nodded slowly. Daniel is right. Nolan's confidence finally lost its polish. He lowered his voice. Then perhaps legal missed a distribution. Robert stared at him. Evelyn does not miss distributions. Evelyn Brooks had been Whitmore's outside counsel during the rescue 6 years earlier. Careful, patient, and almost impossible to surprise. If a document affecting Redwood existed, she would have sent it. I reached into my jacket and took out my phone. Claire watched me unlock it. There were no dramatic alerts. No secret red screen. Just email. Quarterly reports. Board notices. The ordinary paperwork behind extraordinary decisions. I searched North Star. Nothing. Denver acquisition. Nothing. Colorado transaction. Nothing. I checked the Redwood reporting folder. Same result. I put the phone away. There has been no notice. Nolan shook his head. Because there is no final transaction. Then there should be no finalized financing either. His eyes moved toward Robert. That was the moment I knew we were no longer dealing with an innocent misunderstanding. Robert knew it too. Who authorized you to negotiate debt? He asked. Nolan's answer came slowly. I did not authorize anything. I opened discussions. With whom? Several lenders. Names. Nolan exhaled. Robert, not here. For once, I agreed with him. He is right. Claire looked at me, surprised. I continued. This room is full of employees. Whatever this is, they do not need rumors before we have facts. Robert studied me, then nodded. 6 years earlier, panic had nearly destroyed his company faster than debt did. We had learned something then. Information should move deliberately when thousands of livelihoods sit underneath it. Robert checked his watch. 8 tomorrow morning. My conference room. Nolan opened his mouth. Robert stopped him with one sentence. Bring every document connected to North Star, Denver, and the financing. Nolan said nothing. Then Robert looked at me. Daniel, will you be there? Claire's eyes settled on me again. That question carried more weight than it should have. For years, she had watched me make coffee, repair things around the house, and disappear into a home office she barely asked about. Now the chief executive she admired was waiting for my answer. Yes, I said. Nolan gave a short nod and excused himself. I watched him cross the ballroom toward the elevators without stopping to speak to anyone. Robert remained beside us for another moment. I am sorry your evening turned into this. I glanced at Claire. The evening was already complicated. Robert understood. He gave us some privacy and walked toward the stage. Claire and I stood together beneath the chandelier, closer than we had been all night and somehow farther apart. She folded her arms. Were you already suspicious of Nolan? No. Then how did you know about Denver? I did not. She looked confused. You said Denver. Because one of Redwood's quarterly summaries showed an unusual increase in preliminary diligence expenses assigned to the mountain region. It was small enough to ignore unless you knew what those expenses usually meant. Claire stared at me. You noticed that from a quarterly report? Yes. Her voice softened. And you remembered it tonight? I looked toward the elevator where Nolan had disappeared. I remember numbers when they do not fit. Claire was quiet for several seconds. Then she asked, "What happens tomorrow?" I watched the elevator doors close. "Tomorrow," I said, "we find out why Nolan was hoping nobody would ask the right question." Claire and I left the ballroom 20 minutes later, but the silence between us followed all the way down 30 floors. The elevator walls were polished brass, bright enough to reflect both of us without making either reflection look familiar. Claire stood with her hands clasped in front of her. I watched the floor numbers change. 24, 23, 22. Usually after one of her company events, she would talk before we reached the lobby. Who had been promoted? Which executive had said something careless? Whether the keynote speech had gone too long. That night, she said nothing until the doors opened. We crossed the marble lobby beneath a row of hanging lights and stepped outside into cold Chicago air. Traffic moved along Michigan Avenue. A cab rolled past. Somewhere down the block, a bus exhaled at the curb. Claire stopped under the hotel awning. "Did Robert know I was your wife when he hired me?" she asked. I looked at her. That was the question underneath everything else. "No." She searched my face. "Are you sure?" "Completely." "What about when I was promoted to director?" "No." "Vice president?" "No." Her voice tightened. "Senior vice president?" "Claire, I never asked Robert to advance you." "That is not what I asked." "I know." I took a breath. "He knew by then that you were my wife. But he also knew I did not want your career discussed with me." She looked toward the street. "So he knew and never said anything. He respected the boundary. A boundary I did not even know existed. That was fair. I let it stand." She folded her arms against the cold. "Was my division part of the restructuring?" I nodded. "Yes." Her eyes came back to mine. "Tell me exactly what that means." I could have softened it. I did not. Whitmore had 5 operating divisions 6 years ago. 2 were losing money. 1 was profitable, but tied up too much working capital. Your division was small, but its customer retention was strong and its margins were improving. Claire listened without blinking. "Nolan wanted it cut?" she asked. I remembered the old conference room. Nolan had not been chief financial officer then, but he had been part of the finance team. Ambitious, sharp, always quick with a spreadsheet and quicker with a conclusion. "He recommended shutting it down?" I said. Claire's face went still. "And you stopped it?" "I recommended keeping it." "Why?" "Because the numbers supported it." "That's simple." "That's simple." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Nothing about tonight feels simple." We started walking toward the parking garage. Our footsteps echoed under the covered drive. "The leadership program," she said. "Was that you too?" "No." Robert said it came after the restructuring. It did. We told the company to invest more heavily in internal leadership instead of filling every senior role from outside. Robert and Human Resources built the program. I had nothing to do with who got selected. Claire slowed. "But without that program, I might not have moved up. Maybe. Or maybe you would have found another way." "Daniel." She stopped again. "Please do not make this easier for me." I understood what she meant. She was not asking for comfort. She was trying to measure how much of the foundation beneath her life had been connected to decisions I made without her knowing. "Your division remained open because I believed it was worth saving," I said. "The company survived because a lot of people made difficult choices. You were hired because somebody thought you were qualified. You were promoted because you performed. Those are separate facts. Do not combine them just because tonight made them arrive at the same time." Her eyes dropped toward the sidewalk. For years, Claire had worn confidence naturally. Watching her question, it bothered me more than I expected. I did not want revenge. I did not want her success reduced just because she had underestimated mine. That would have made me guilty of the same mistake. "You earned your career," I said. "Do not hand that away because you are angry with me." She looked up. "I am angry with you. I know. And I am embarrassed." I said nothing. "Not because Robert thanked you," she continued. "Not even because of Redwood. I am embarrassed because I stood there tonight and introduced you like you were someone I needed to explain away." The honesty in that sentence surprised me. Claire looked toward the stream of headlights moving beyond the awning. "When did I start doing that?" she asked. "I do not know. You must have noticed." "I did." "Then why did you let me?" The question sat between us in the cold. I thought about all the dinners where I had smiled instead of correcting her. All the mornings when she rushed out the door while I reviewed reports she assumed I would never understand. All the times I told myself that needing recognition was weakness. Maybe silence had protected my pride. Maybe it had also protected her assumptions. Because I kept thinking you would notice on your own, I said. Claire absorbed that without defending herself. Then she asked the question I had been avoiding. Did you stop respecting me? No. Her shoulders loosened slightly. But I stopped feeling respected by you. That landed differently. She looked down for several seconds. A black sedan pulled beneath the awning, but it was not ours. I do not know what to say to that, she whispered. You do not have to say anything tonight. And tomorrow? Tomorrow is not about us. I started toward the garage. Again, tomorrow is about Whitmore. Claire followed. And Nolan. I looked ahead at the concrete ramp leading underground. Especially Nolan. My phone vibrated once in my pocket. I took it out. The message was from Evelyn Brooks. 6 words. We need to speak before 8. I stopped walking. Claire noticed immediately. What is it? I read the message again. Then I looked at her. Something just changed. Something just changed, I said. Claire looked at the phone in my hand, but I did not show her the message immediately. Evelyn Brooks did not send vague texts. She was the kind of attorney who could summarize a 40-page agreement in 3 sentences and still leave nothing important out. If she wrote that we needed to speak before 8, there was a reason. Is it about Nolan? Claire asked. Probably. How would Evelyn know already? I slid the phone back into my pocket. Because if Nolan has been negotiating something that touches Redwood rights, legal should have seen at least part of it. Claire studied me. And if legal has not, then somebody worked around legal. We reached the parking garage. The air smelled faintly of concrete and cold exhaust. Our car sat beneath a fluorescent light near the far wall. Claire unlocked it, but neither of us got in. Call her, she said. I checked the time. 10:47. Not here. 10 minutes later, we were sitting in the quiet corner of the hotel lobby near a row of dark windows facing the river. Claire sat across from me while I called Evelyn. She answered on the second ring. Daniel. No greeting. No small talk. What did you find? I asked. Not enough yet. That usually means too much. She was silent for a moment. Robert contacted me after your conversation. He asked whether Northstar Systems had ever been submitted for legal review. And no formal acquisition package has crossed my desk. Claire leaned forward. I put the call on speaker. Evelyn continued. But I searched our document management system for Northstar, Denver, and the lenders Nolan has used recently. You found something. A draft engagement letter from Graymont Capital. I knew the name. Chicago Investment Bank. Aggressive but reputable. For how much? $125 million in proposed debt financing. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Nolan had said approximately $120 million. Close enough to confirm he had not been guessing. I asked, who signed the engagement? Nobody. That is the problem. The draft appears to have been circulated between Nolan, Graymont, and an outside advisory firm called Pierce Advisory Group. I looked at Claire. She looked back at me. Pierce, she said. Evelyn heard her. Yes. Related to Nolan? I asked. I am checking corporate records now. The name sat wrong in my head. Maybe coincidence. Maybe not. Good judgment starts by refusing to turn suspicion into fact before the evidence arrives. Do not assume anything yet, I said. I am not, Evelyn replied. But there is more. I leaned back. Go ahead. Northstar's proposed purchase price is $182 million. That matches what Nolan said. Yes. The preliminary valuation materials support something closer to $130 million. Claire stared at the carpet. $50 million was not a rounding error. Why the premium? I asked. That is what I want to know. Evelyn paused. There is also a consulting fee built into the transaction. How much? $8 million. I felt the old clarity settle over me. Not anger. Numbers. An acquisition priced above initial valuation. Heavy debt. An outside advisor with a familiar name. A fee large enough to deserve explanation. Individually, each fact could have an innocent reason. Together, they deserve daylight. Who receives the fee? I asked. Pierce Advisory Group. Claire whispered. That cannot be a coincidence. It can't, I said, until we prove otherwise. Evelyn agreed. I have requested ownership records. We will have them before morning. What else? One more thing. Nolan asked information technology to restrict access to the Northstar folder 2 weeks ago. Authorized by whom? The request lists executive confidentiality. That is not authorization. I know. Claire rubbed her thumb slowly along the edge of her purse. Could he do that without Robert noticing? For a while, I said. Large companies run on delegated authority. That is why controls exist. Evelyn added. And that is why tomorrow cannot be an informal conversation anymore. What are you recommending? Formal preservation notice tonight. No documents deleted, modified, or removed. I also want information technology to secure access logs before Nolan arrives. I considered it. That was measured. Protective, not accusatory. Do it. Claire looked at me. She had spent years thinking my work happened quietly because it was small. Now she was hearing the reason quiet mattered. No shouting. No accusations. Just facts protected before someone had the chance to rearrange them. Evelyn said, I will be at headquarters at 7:15. I will be there at 7. Robert. He should arrive after we know what we actually have. Agreed. We ended the call. For several seconds, Claire and I sat without speaking. The hotel lobby had nearly emptied. A worker near the front desk adjusted a vase of flowers. Outside, headlights moved slowly along the river. You sounded different, Claire finally said. Different how? Like this is the version of you I stopped seeing. I did not know how to answer that. Maybe because part of it was true. I had spent years keeping business outside our marriage, and she had spent years mistaking distance for absence. I am still the same man who makes coffee in the morning, I said. I know. Her voice was quieter. That is what makes tonight harder. I stood. We should go home. Claire rose too. Then my phone vibrated again. This time the message was from Evelyn. 2 sentences. Corporate records just came back. Pierce Advisory Group is owned by Nolan's brother. For a moment, I simply stared at Evelyn's message. Pierce Advisory Group is owned by Nolan's brother. 6 words would have been enough. Those 7 made the room feel smaller. Claire read my face before I showed her the screen. It is connected to him, is it not? She asked. I handed her the phone. She read the message once, then again. $8 million. Her voice barely carried across the lobby. His brother gets $8 million if Whitmore buys Northstar? If the draft reflects the final structure. Daniel, that cannot be allowed. It will not be allowed to disappear. She looked frustrated by my answer. That is not what I said. I know. But right now we have a relationship, a proposed fee, and a transaction Nolan did not properly disclose. That is enough to investigate. It is not enough to invent the rest. Claire handed the phone back. You are remarkably calm. Calm keeps facts from turning into stories. We drove home just after 11. Claire sat beside me staring through the passenger window while Chicago lights gave way to quieter streets. Neither of us turned on the radio. At home, the kitchen looked exactly as we had left it. 2 coffee mugs drying beside the sink. Mail on the counter. A bowl of apples under the cabinet light. I loosened my tie and opened my laptop at the kitchen table. Claire remained standing. You are working now. I want to review the last 4 quarterly packages before morning. Can I help? The question caught me off guard. Not because Claire lacked the ability. Because it had been years since she had asked to enter this part of my life. I pulled out the chair beside me. Sit. We went through the reports slowly. Revenue. Cash flow. Debt ratios. Capital spending. I showed her where the mountain region diligence expense had first appeared. $28,000. Then $61,000. Then $114,000. Small compared with Whitmore's overall numbers, but consistent enough to form a trail. Claire leaned closer to the screen. Why would nobody flag that? Because expenses are not suspicious just because they increase. But you remembered them. Because the descriptions changed. I pointed to the first entry. Market evaluation. The second said regional development. The third said transaction diligence. Claire stared at the words. Transaction. That was the first one that bothered me. She sat back. And you did nothing? I expected the next board package to explain it. It never did. No. Her expression tightened. Nolan controlled the information. Maybe. Tomorrow we find out. At 12:30, another email arrived from Evelyn. Information technology. Had preserved the Northstar folder and access logs. Nobody would be notified until morning. At 12:48, she sent a second update. Nolan had accessed the restricted folder from his company laptop less than 20 minutes after leaving the gala. Claire read that one over my shoulder. He is still working on it. Or checking what is there. Because he knows Robert is looking. Probably. She rubbed her temples. I have worked with Nolan for 5 years. There was disappointment in her voice now, not fear. He recommended me for the senior vice president role. I closed the laptop halfway. That does not make you responsible for his decisions. I know. She paused. I just keep thinking about how certain I was about people. Robert was powerful, so I admired him. Nolan was successful, so I trusted his judgment. You were home more, so I assumed you had stepped away from everything that mattered. She looked at me. I made people into titles. I did not correct her. Some realizations need space more than comfort. Get some sleep, I said. You have work tomorrow. She almost smiled. Apparently so do you. At 6 the next morning, I was already dressed. Dark suit, white shirt, no tie yet, coffee in a travel mug. Claire came downstairs wearing gray slacks and a navy blouse, her hair pulled back. She stopped when she saw me. You are going in early. Evelyn will be there at 7:15. You said you would be there at 7. I will. She glanced toward the driveway. Take my car. Why? Because your truck has a warning light. It has had that warning light for 3 months. Exactly. For the first time since the gala, we both smiled. It lasted only a second, but it mattered. I picked up my keys. Claire walked me to the door. Daniel. I turned. She hesitated. Whatever happens with Nolan, please do not protect my position because I am your wife. I studied her face. I never have. I know that now. I nodded and stepped outside. Dawn had barely reached the street. 25 minutes later, I pulled into the underground garage beneath Whitmore Technologies. The building rose above me in steel and glass, quiet before the workday began. At the executive entrance, a security officer checked my identification, then looked at his screen and immediately straightened. Mr. Mercer, Miss Brooks asked that you be sent directly to the 23rd floor. The elevator opened without delay. When I stepped out, Evelyn was already waiting beside the conference room with a thick folder against her chest. She did not say good morning. She opened the door and placed the folder on the table. We have a bigger problem than the $8 million fee, she said.